folks. We've got a little bit left to cover in Genesis chapter 21. I hope that I'm assuming you have been able to read Genesis chapter 21, as this would be our second week in that chapter. Would you like me to briefly summarize, or would you like to read it? Okay, we'll just summarize. So in Genesis chapter 1, this was immediately after Abraham went to visit Abimelech, and said, this is my sister again. The Lord visited some discomfort on the women who were supposed to be giving birth, and he said, this is your sister, and then he made a pact with them, and then he prayed for them as a prophet that they would be healed, and they gave birth, and then immediately after that, in Genesis chapter 21, God visited Sarah and gave her a child, the promised seed, Yitzchak. And what we have here is really a section that's dealing with the birth of Isaac and also the separation of Ishmael from the family of Abraham. Now, I had not made a lot of notes to myself because, frankly, I thought it might be really challenging, and I didn't want to, tax the situation very much. But, Paul talks about the descendants of Isaac and the descendants of Ishmael, and one bearing children for death, and one being the son of the promise, and one is a covenant of slavery in corruption, and the other one is children of promise and the seed and stuff like that. So that is a a very deep analogy that Rabbi Paul Shaul came up with regarding these two children, which I think is a tremendous and valuable insight. Do you want to discuss that for a moment? It's a little challenging, it's a little deep, but if you want to take you know where that is, Mike? Galatians chapter 4.
28 to 31.
Okay, let's take a look at that for just a couple of minutes, because I wanted to say something about that, just because Paul brought it up, and it's a rather important thing, but it is challenging, because it's an amazing analogy. So if you go to Galatians chapter 4, and we will look at starting in chapter 22, Galatians 4:22. We'll start there. Excuse me. And this is Paul's reflection and spiritual insights regarding the son of the free woman versus the son of the slave woman, the servant girl. And he brings this analogy quite deep, and let's see what he has to say, and then we'll discuss it. He says, "For it is written that Abraham had two sons, one by the slave woman, and the other by the free woman. But one, the son of the slave woman, was born by natural descent, while the other, the son of the free woman, was born through the promise. These things may be treated as an allegory, for these women represent two covenants. One is from Mount Sinai, bearing children for slavery. This is haGar. Now, haGar represents Mount Sinai in Arabia and corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery with her children. But the Jerusalem above is free, and she is our mother. For it is written, Rejoice, O barren woman who does not bear children. Break forth and shout, you who have no birth pangs, because the children of the desolate woman are more numerous than those of the woman who has a husband. But you, brothers and sisters, are children of the promise, like Isaac. But just as at that time the one born by natural descent persecuted the one born according to the Spirit, so it is now. But what does the Scripture say? Throw out the slave woman and her son, for the son of the slave woman will not share the inheritance with the son of the free woman. Therefore, brothers and sisters, we are not children of the slave woman, but of the free woman." Now, I want to ask you, what is your understanding of what Paul is talking about here regarding two covenants. What are these two covenants, Tracy?
Well, I think it would make it a lot easier if we went through it again and read with the understanding of flesh versus spirit. Slave woman, flesh, free woman, spirit.
Okay.
And that the one that does not travail gives birth to spiritual people. The one that travails is of the flesh.
Okay.
Now, when he talks about her being, haGar being born according to the flesh in verse 23, it's because that's how Ishmael came about, trying to make God's promise happen through the flesh. Whereas Isaac was the one that God promised and was born through the Spirit. And so we see that picture back here in Genesis of the flesh being cast out. And that's what Paul's saying. Cast out the flesh, because flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God.
Okay. So you see this analogy that Paul is talking about as a spirit versus flesh dichotomy. And, okay, so a covenant of the spirit and a covenant of the flesh, what would those be? Some people might assume, and many do, that the covenant of the flesh is the Old Testament and the covenant of the Spirit is the New Testament. Is that a common understanding? I mean, I'm sure it's not very terribly common among you guys, but is that a common understanding amongst people? I think it probably is.
Most likely, especially it says Mount Sinai.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a connection to that.
Yeah.
Because that's the law that brought the curse for disobedience to the law. Through Messiah, we are redeemed from the curse of the law of sin and death because we transgressed that law.
Excellent. Excellent.
I
Keith?
agree, and a lot of people will use that as an excuse not to follow Torah because we no longer are bound to that. But Tracy's explanation, yes, it shows the origination of the definition of sin, and now that we have it defined, the Spirit's in us to avoid sinning. But it doesn't mean we've done away with the law. So, yeah.
Sure. Okay. Excellent insights. Angela?
In my commentary at the bottom, it says, Paul says law and grace simply do not mix. To use the impossible ground of justification by law is to leave or abandon or fall away from the way of grace as the only basis.
Why?
You're all guilty. You're all guilty.
Sorry.
That's what it says. Is that your Ryrie study Bible?
Yeah.
Charles Ryrie did that to you, huh? Well, he's all right.
I think it also ties back into Paul's somewhat confusing commentary in Romans 8.
Yes.
About the flesh versus spirit.
Sure.
And he talks about, doing things he doesn't want to do.
Sure.
That's the flesh
Yep.
nature.
Yep.
When you look back, like Tracy was saying in Genesis 16 about when Sarah casts Hagar out, what's Hagar told to do by the messenger? Go back and submit.
Go back and submit. That's right.
To submit to the Spirit.
Yep. Absolutely. I think that's a good insight, Mike, and I think, it's beyond the scope of what we want to do today, I think, is go through the book of Galatians, but there's a lot of challenging material there, and if you don't have a clear understanding of what Paul is talking about, you can definitely get yourself wrapped around the axle on that thing. And there's been a lot of discussion about that. I'm sure that you guys have watched a lot of videos and heard a lot of teachers trying to break down Galatians for you. That's one of the most challenging books that people have to deal with, frankly. But I think that once you come to an understanding that Paul is not talking about the Torah as being some type of slavery or something, but actually is more referencing the curse of the Torah, as Tracy was mentioning previously, that there are certain, I think that if you really understand the book of Leviticus and you try to figure out the sacrificial system and what those offerings are for and what types of sins are being forgiven with offerings, what types of sins are being forgiven with offerings? Tracy?
Unintentional, ignorant.
Unintentional sins done in ignorance, that is correct. So what if I am an adulterer or I murder someone? What sacrifice am I offering for that? And there isn't one. So what do I do, Keith?
Well, no, you would have been stoned. You would have been Right?
Okay, so what about David when he slept with Bathsheba and then killed her husband? What did he do? Did he offer sacrifice?
He repented.
He repented. What else did he do? Nothing. There's nothing else he could have done. He wrote a song about it. I suck. I am in serious trouble. There's nothing I can do. I mean, if you read Psalm 51 is a tremendous, tremendous insight into that. It's, you know, he says, sacrifice, if there was something I could do, I would do it, but I can't. So I think that's a tremendous thing, and that, I think, is what we need to keep in mind when we're reading Paul, is that if you, and how many sins are there that come with a death penalty? There's quite a few. If you violate the Sabbath, death penalty. That's just one, and that one seems to us, to our sensitivities, like, what? Yeah, I'm going to death penalty for, yes, you know, sexual immorality. There's so many different things, and yeah, so you can get yourself in serious trouble, and those, the penalty for those is death, and you can't get those forgiven by going to a priest. So you are under a curse. There's no other way around it. And the Torah is not going to take care of that for you. You can't go and do an extra Shabbat or some extra prayers. You have to rely upon the grace of God, period. That's all you can do. Tracy?
A couple things I would say is that this whole, you know, grace versus law thing is, they are not in opposition to one another. They are not opposites at all. They are, in fact, I think it's in John, it says, for grace upon grace we have been given, for the law has been given through Moses, grace and truth through Yahushua Messiah, because through his Spirit, he writes that law on our hearts so that we may do it. And I just wanted to read, if I could, what Mike was saying in Romans 8, because I think it really does help clarify even what you were saying in Galatians. And that is, the law of the Spirit of life in Yahushua Messiah has made me free from the law of sin and death, which came from transgression of the Torah. For what the law, the Torah, could not do, in that it was weak through the flesh. The Torah is not weak, my flesh is weak. And the Torah, it couldn't do that through my flesh. It had to come from the inside, from the heart. So God did, by sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh on account of sin, he condemned sin in the flesh, that the righteous requirements of the law might be fulfilled in us, who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. For those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh, and then they can only read the Torah through flesh eyes. They can't see the spirit of the Torah. But those who live according to the Spirit, the things of the Spirit, for to be carnally minded is death, so flesh and blood cannot enter the kingdom. But to be spiritually minded is life and peace, because the carnal mind is enmity against God, for it is not subject to the Torah of God, nor indeed can it be. So then those who are in the flesh cannot please God. Why? Because they are not subject to the Torah.
Okay. So let's just briefly take a digression for just a couple of minutes. We'll go on a rabbit trail. Who is in this situation of being under the Torah? Who is in the predicament of being under the curse of the Torah in today's world? Sarah?
The people who are trying to justify themselves through Torah and not relying on Messiah.
Okay, that's an excellent insight. Absolutely. How about people who don't know God at all? Are they under the curse of the Torah? They don't violate the law?
Their penalty is death. That's what Romans says, right?
Right. I mean, isn't the penalty for violation of the Torah?
If you're under the Torah, you're judged by the Torah. If you're not under the Torah, you're destroyed.
Yeah, so those with the law will be judged by the law, but those who are without the law
Will be judged without the law. Okay.
will perish without the law.
Perish without the law. Okay. Excellent. So what and I always want to keep reminding you of this. Were there any Old Testament saints? What did they rely on?
They were looking ahead.
By faith. So is it possible that someone was walking in the Torah through faith prior to the Messiah arriving on the planet? Yes, we must always remember that, because some of our thinking can begin to get us wrapped around the axle to where we can begin to think, boy, I wonder what happened to all those people before Jesus came. That's a predicament you don't want to get in, because then you're condemning everyone who came before Jesus to hell, and you can't do that. So we've got to figure out. Right. So we got to remember, and I think that that's always what we need to kind of keep in our minds, is that everybody who was on that side of the cross was looking forward, and everybody on this side of the cross is looking back. We're all looking at the same thing. It's a mirror. It's two halves of a menorah. It's, absolutely good stuff. So we need to keep that in mind. Did you want to say something? Oh, okay. I thought you were just picking. You were picking your nose. Okay, gotcha. So, we can, anybody who, we did a study on the book of Romans a couple of years ago, it seems like. Was that a couple of years ago? Maybe it was. It took us about a year to do it. But, I would encourage you to go back and listen to that, because there was a lot of tremendous wisdom from everybody who did research, and we talked through that book, and we did a good job, I think, trying to explain Paul as best we could. There's a lot of wisdom there. So let's move forward just a little bit I wanted to bring out for you in verse 12 of chapter 21 that Sarah says, drive out this female servant and her son, because the son of this female servant shall not inherit with my son, with Yitzhak. And the matter was very evil in the eyes of Abraham because of his son. But God said to Abraham, let it not be evil in your eyes because of the boy and because of your female servant. Whatever Sarah has said to you, listen to her voice. Now, if you look at in your text, if you have an interlinear translation, it's an interesting thing to look at that in the Hebrew. And I'll just bring your attention to this, and if you want to look into this, it's kind of interesting. The words where it says, listen to her voice, that's kind of an interesting thing. Does anybody have that in Hebrew? What does it say where it says, listen to her voice? What's that? Oh, no, in Hebrew. It says Shema is listen, and then what is to her voice? Right.
I heard the voice of the Lord.
That's right. That's right. Now, what you're going to see, which is kind of interesting, is kol. You notice something interesting about that word there when you add on those little tacky letters like that we're learning about in our Hebrew language study. It says becholah. Now, I don't want to go into some weird Jewish mysticism stuff, but this is one of the, how the Hebrews like to rearrange letters and do, counting of numbers, sequences, and stuff like that. It's really fascinating stuff, but don't go too, like gematria. So this is one of the first places where they will actually take this word, becholah, and you just flip the first and last, that's the first two letters, and what do you have? It's basically Kabbalah. Does anybody know what Kabbalah is? It's Jewish mysticism, essentially. Yes, Angela?
I know when it is used in the Bible, and it's something to do with things lining up.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. The word, this is actually one of those things where they kind of play with the letters, but there's a reason that they play with the letters. It's not just an arbitrary, you might think, well, why would you flip the letters? Why would you look at this word, becholah, and flip some letters and say, now it says Kabbalah? Why would you do that? It's because the word actually Kabbalah appears in the Torah 16 times, but it's in a most unusual fashion. It is actually, if you look in the book of Exodus, when they're talking about making the tabernacle, and there's like this curtain that is over the tabernacle, and there's these clasps that hook the curtains that are right over the dividing line of the curtain that comes between the Holy and the Holy of Holies. that there's these little metal clasps that are holding those curtains together. Those are actually called Kabbalah. And this word here, listen to her voice, is a mysterious piece of wisdom coming in here, because Abraham has to try to figure out in this situation, there is almost like a hook going on here, where I have to figure out, how am I going to trust in my Father in heaven and yet listen to the voice of my wife? These two seem to be in opposition. One is perhaps operating in the flesh. You can certainly get that impression from what Sarah says. We need to get rid of this woman because she's not going to inherit with my son. It almost seems like I don't want him getting my stuff. But I don't think that that's what she's talking about. I think she's talking about something else, but it definitely seems to be coming from a flesh perspective. And Abraham, it seems evil in his eyes. And I don't want to go too much deeper than that, but I would challenge you to look into this. There's some very fascinating stuff. You can look at, for example, the word Kabbalah, the gematrical, did I not say that correctly? You'll figure it out. The gematria value of the word Kabbalah is 137. And that's the fine constant ratio. It's kind of like Fibonacci. It's an exact integer of the speed of light and the exact speed that electrons go around a nucleus. It's like this one divides into that one. It's really amazing stuff. Angela?
That thing where it's the ratio between the speed of light, which is the spiritual thing, you cannot hold light, and the speed of I think it's an electron or proton.
Going around a nucleus, yeah.
That's what makes that matter.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like this connector between the physical and the spiritual. And that place in the temple, you have connecting the place where the spirit resides and the place full of the objects, the physical.
Right.
And I keep saying this over and over again, that we are a unique creature. We are a combination of physical and spiritual.
Right.
And I think our goal is to make our flesh, our physical, submit to our spiritual.
Right.
Just like the Jacob and Esau story, which we'll get to, and we'll see how that is a story of the flesh submitting, the firstborn, submitting to the secondborn, the spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what this whole thing is about. And so this week I've been thinking about this. We need to get our physical and our spiritual 137 for Kabbalah. Line that perfectly.
Yeah. Good insight.
Be the best creature we can be. We're not an animal, just physical. We're not an angel, spiritual. We are unique beings.
Yeah. Interesting. So I think that and I will just bring this out, that the interesting thing that kind of drew the sages of old to this passage is because that word, that phrase there, listen to her voice, is very curious, because we have a few examples, and I mentioned in previous weeks how you might want to take these examples of where it says that the man listened to the voice of his wife. This one sticks out like a sore thumb, because God steps forward and says, listen to the voice of your wife. But can you remember other times when someone listened to the voice of their wife? When was the first time? That was Adam and Eve. That was not good. Tracy?
I was going to say there's a difference, though. When you pointed out this Hebrew word, it says listen in her voice.
Right.
It's not to, and it is with Adam and Eve, you listen to the voice. I don't know what the difference is, but it's a base.
Right.
That means in or
Right.
at.
Right.
So there's
Yep.
a difference.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's a good insight, and that's one of the things that kind of draws attention to this passage. What was the second time that someone listened to the voice? You remember any other ones? Abraham?
Yeah.
Right here?
No, not in this one, but earlier on.
Yes. When she said, why don't you get with haGar and we'll have a child by her and I'll be built up. And he said he listens to the voice of his wife. So those two didn't go very well. This one,
And that was to the voice in that one with Ned, not the bait.
right? Isn't that interesting? I would definitely recommend, if you don't have a stone chumash You should get one because there's some really cool stuff in there. Just tremendous insights that the Hebrew scholars have had over the years. The Midrash Rabbah, there's so many cool insights that they count these letters and study them and see what is this saying exactly. It's so neat. It's really so neat that you...
She was Sarai at that time, and now she's Sarah.
That's right.
There's going to be a change there.
So I will just encourage you, yes.
I was just going to say, part of it here to me is that God's reminding Abraham that his son Ishmael has promises for him too.
Yes.
That I understand Sarah's wanting to separate them,
Mhm.
which is right.
Sure.
But it's not evil from that point that he has his own promises.
Yeah, absolutely. And have the descendants of Ishmael been blessed?
Mm-hmm.
How so? Are they still blessed today?
They're a multitude.
They're definitely a multitude, and they control most of the world's oil supply. That's a good blessing. That's a good blessing. So yeah, absolutely. All of the descendants of Abraham were blessed. There's no question about it. But yeah, I would encourage you to look at different places regarding, listen to the voice. It's a very interesting study that you might want to do in your spare time. All that.
By the way, is that the word voice, because it means also thunder, is it voice is always that word, or is it
Coal?
sometimes? Yes.
I believe so. Yeah, I don't know well enough to say, but I'm pretty certain that coal.
Moses listened to the voice.
Yes.
Thunder.
Yes. Angela?
On my cards, it's voice or sound,
Mm-hmm.
which really broadens it.
Well, yeah, which is kind of interesting because you'll see that in the book of Exodus quite a bit when it's like you don't know whether it's a voice or whether it's thunder or something like that, and I think it's both. It's kind of interesting. I want to take a look at this little portion here where it happens with the mother and the son when they run off into the wilderness, when Hagar took off with the boy. She left and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. She seems to have gotten lost and just began to wander around. What is this? What do you think of this, and does this remind you of anything? What does the idea, the expression "lost in the wilderness" make you think of? The children of Israel in the wilderness, yes. And what is she suddenly lacking? Water. Does this tie in right back to what Paul was talking about in the book of Galatians? Those children of Israel died off in the wilderness because they refused to believe. They refused to listen. They refused to act in faith. They tested. Tracy?
I also wanted to make that comparison too to the casting off of the flesh, and that's where Hagar and her sons go.
Right.
That is because that is where the flesh is tested in the wilderness.
Mhm.
That is where Israel went in the wilderness. Their flesh was tested.
Yep.
Messiah in the wilderness, his flesh was tested.
Yep.
And that's what this is representing here. The
Yeah.
flesh is being sent out and tested in the wilderness.
Absolutely. And I think here's a perfect expression of that test in the wilderness. And I think that these two stories in this chapter and in the next one are juxtaposed for that very reason, where Hagar is being challenged with the death of her son. And in the next chapter, Abraham is challenged with the death of his son. Now, just compare, just from memory, because we haven't read chapter 22 yet, but I'm sure you're familiar with it. How do you compare Hagar dealing with the potential threatening death of her son and Abraham with Isaac? How do they respond? You notice that when she, what's that?
She was just going to watch him die. She brought up 100 guys and watched him die.
Well, she refused to watch him die. She didn't want to watch him die, which is kind of interesting. I mean, she couldn't do anything. I don't want to. I'm not going to cast aspersions on this woman because, frankly, that's a horrifying potentiality there. But she was so afraid of death. I think she was without hope. She didn't have faith, and she was afraid of death, and she didn't have any hope, and she cast off. It literally says cast off. It almost makes it sound like to throw him under a bush, you know. Now, here's another key thing. How old is this boy? He's about 16 or 17 years old, you know. We often, you know, you get these little Bible pictures in your mind where it's like throwing an infant child under a bush. No, this is a teenage boy, you know, who is dying in the wilderness of thirst. Well, because he was at least 13 years old when Isaac was born, because he was circumcised by his father Abraham, and then 13 years later, remember he was 13 when he was circumcised, and then sometime shortly after that, we're not exactly sure, but it's supposed to be a year or two later that Isaac was born, so he's got to be at least 14 or 15 years old. And so she takes him and throws him under a bush and goes off a bow shot or so away. I'm guessing that's approximately 100 yards if you can shoot a bow pretty far, to sit and weep. Notice also, go ahead, Keith.
Well, the voice, when God heard his voice of the lad, it was a het cold.
The Aleph Tav voice. It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely.
I didn't know if I go ahead at 17.
No, that's fine, that's fine. You know what I noticed too about that section is who is weeping in this passage? Both the boy and the mom. Now, what does God say when he appears? What did he hear? He heard the voice of the boy. What do you make of that? Was he not listening to the mom? Was he only concerned about the boy? Why? Any insight into that?
Boy was innocent in what he was
Was he though?
to be.
Well, okay, that's a good.
Mercy on him.
Is he innocent though?
No.
According to Jewish tradition, no. He is a son of the commandment. He's probably been bar mitzvahed. I'm just kidding. I don't know if he was bar mitzvahed. But he reached the age of accountability. And what was he doing? Why did he get kicked out of the camp?
Mocking.
He was somehow persecuting, according to Paul, he was persecuting that newborn child. Don't know exactly what that means, but somehow. Angela?
Is it because he's a descendant of Abraham?
I think-
He promises to Abraham.
I think that's precisely why it is that he is one of the children of Abraham, and it is for his sake. And you can see that a lot. It is for, if you look at the Amidah prayer, for example, there's a lot of appeal made to the ancestors for the sake of the ancestors, because they've found favor with God. And it's like we've talked about before, you know, but the idea of appealing to a righteous person, which is a foreshadowing in my mind of the Messiah. Absolutely. So, yes, in the merit of Abraham, Ishmael is saved, is rescued. Would someone else have their hand up? Did I miss something? Okay. So Isaac is going to be sacrificed, and Abraham is right there, right involved, perfectly willing to do it. haGar is kind of squeamish and doesn't even want to be around. I understand that, but it's a stark contrast when you look and compare and contrast these two stories of somebody being, you know, a young person dying. Tracy?
Another interesting thing here, we're talking about the faith and no faith kind of situation, and the flesh being tested in the wilderness, and
Yeah.
haGar representing flesh. And it says, and God opened her eyes and she saw a well of water. The well of water was already there.
Yeah.
He opened her eyes so she could see it.
Yes.
Messiah says, come to me and I will give you drink. He's
Right.
there. And as she fills herself with this spirit of life, of water, we think of that as Messiah.
Sure.
And then gives it to her son, and he drinks.
Good
So,
insight.
I think that there's this picture, and then saying, now go back and submit to Sarah.
Right, right. Good insight. Lou?
Well, this is kind of my thinking, I guess, but is there a difference between a mother's response to a child and a father?
Absolutely. I'm sure there is. I'm sure there is. I couldn't speak to that definitively. But
But I meant,
But no, I take your meaning. I don't know what I would say about that. I would have to say yes, there certainly would be. I mean, each situation is particularly difficult and challenging, but yeah, there has to be a
Because she's raised this child, right?
yeah,
No father,
right,
basically.
right. Now, it speaks to what we have been talking about with regards to faith. I mean, does she know that there's something special for this child? Yes, she does, because God told her when she ran away the first time. He said, I'll make the child great. She's the one who received the prophecy of him being dwelling over against his brothers and being a wild donkey of a man, and I'll make a great nation of him and 12 princes coming from him. So she knows these promises. Does she trust them? Does she believe that they are coming to pass? It doesn't seem like it, does it? It seems like she's given up hope. Now, before we so easily jump to that conclusion, you know what it's like when God has a plan and it's not according to our timeline. When we think it should be happening, we can lose hope real quickly. When God doesn't act on our timeline, and it's like, well, I need that thing that you promised, or that help that you promised. I need that now. He's like, I need your faith to grow a little bit more. Let's hold off just a moment. I've got my perfect timing set up. Angela, did you want to point something out?
Oh, when he asked about the mother's reaction, in Jewish mythology, you'll notice the chapter after Abraham takes Isaac up the mountain, Sarah's dead.
Yeah.
And in Jewish mythology, she found out what Abraham had taken him off to do and
Died.
it killed her.
Yeah. That is.
Whether that's true or not, but yeah, I think there's a difference between a father and a mother.
Yeah, that is the legend, the mythology, if you want to call it that. That's, she got up in the morning, because it says Abraham arose early and took off immediately to go fulfill this set of instructions, and that she died when she found out what you did. He did what? She had a heart attack or something and fell over and died. I don't know, but that's, yeah, seriously. I think that does kind of address your question, Lou, in a certain sense. Any other potential wisdom or insights into Genesis chapter 21? We've dealt with it for a couple of weeks now, but I just had a few additional points that I wanted to make in regards to that. If there's nothing else, I'm going to move forward. Yes, Carla.
Question, because I see where Abraham heard from God that Ishmael would be blessed and fruitful and multiplied and become a father of 12 princes and a great nation, but I don't know, I don't recall where Hagar heard that. I know that she would have a son.
Yeah.
She ran away when she was pregnant.
Yeah, when she...
I'm trying to find it.
Yeah, let's take a look real quick.
Chapter 16, right?
Chapter 16? Okay. So he listened to the voice. She was despised.
11, 12.
See, you are conceiving, in verse 11, 16:11, and bearing a son, and shall call his name Ishmael, because Jehovah has heard your affliction, and he is to be a wild man, his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and over against all his brothers he shall dwell. And so yeah, she has. I think I mixed up a little bit of the prophecy to Abraham and her. But yeah, he did speak to her. So does she have enough information to say this child is supposed to live to be an adult? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So let's look at Genesis chapter 22 now. We'll read through it from front to back, and then we'll kind of dissect it a little bit at a time here. So in Genesis chapter 22, it says this. And it came to be after these events that Elohim tried Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, Here I am. And he said, Take your son now, your only son, Yishach, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as an ascending offering on one of the mountains which I command you. And Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took 2 of his young men with him and Yishach his son. And he split the wood for the ascending offering and arose and went to the place which Elohim had commanded him. And on the 3rd day, Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place from a distance. So Abraham said to his young men, Stay here with the donkey while the boy and I go over there and worship and come back to you. And Abraham took the wood of the ascending offering and laid it on Yitzchak his son. And he took the fire in his hand and a knife, and the two of them went together. And Yitzchak spoke to Abraham his father and said, My father. And he said, Here I am, my son. And he said, Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for an ascending offering? And Abraham said, My son, Elohim does provide for himself the lamb for an ascending offering. And the two of them went together. And they came to the place which Elohim had commanded him, and Abraham built a slaughter place there and placed the wood in order. And he bound Yitzchak his son and laid him on the slaughter place upon the wood. And Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the messenger of Adonai called to him from the heavens and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Hineni, here I am. And he said, Do not lay your hand on the boy, nor touch him, for now I know that you fear Elohim, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted his eyes and looked, and saw behind him a ram caught in a bush by its horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up for an ascending offering instead of his son. And Abraham called the name of the place Yehovah Yireh, as it is said to this day, On the mountain Yehovah provides. And the messenger of Yehovah called to Abraham a second time from the heavens and said, By myself I have sworn, declares Adonai, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, that I shall certainly bless you, and I shall certainly increase your seed as the stars of the heavens, and as the sand which is on the seashore. And let your seed possess the gate of their enemies. And in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. Then Abraham returned to his young men, and they rose up and went together to Beersheba. And Abraham dwelt at Beersheba. And it came to be after these events that it was reported to Abraham, saying, Behold, Milcah too has borne children to your brother Nahor, Uz his firstborn, and Buz his brother, and Kemuel the father of Aram, and Chesed, and Hazo, and Pildash, and Yildaph, and Bethuel. And Bethuel brought forth Ribkah. These 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother, and his concubine, whose name was Reumah, also bore Tebah, and Gaham, and Tahash, and Ma'akah. Interesting stuff, huh? Okay, so now we are going to back up and start at the beginning. And I want to just briefly discuss some of the kind of details to kind of set the stage, if you will. How is it that Abraham is the only son? Did you notice that that phrase, your only son, is mentioned 3 times? Yeah. Did I say that? Oh. Yeah, so how is it that Isaac is the only son of Abraham? Is he the only son of Abraham?
Not physically.
Not really, Gracie?
Wouldn't it be like the only son with the promise?
Yes.
How is
Absolutely.
Messiah the only son of God?
Good question. Good question. Angela?
Well, Abram was the father of Ishmael, technically.
That is
So
what.
he is the only son of Abraham.
Good point. Good point. Since, yes, that he is, A, he is the promised seed, and B, you could get technical and say, well, Abram was the one who fathered Ishmael, but Abraham was the one who fathered Yitzchak. So that, it's just interesting that God 3 times says, your only son, your only son, your only son. Where is Moriah, and what is its history? What have you heard? What is Moreh, Tracy?
Rebellion.
Okay.
Moreh is t-shirt, but
Right.
it's very close to rebellion, which is Marah.
Right. Mera. Yeah.
I think this word could go either way. I've studied a little bit, so
Sure.
I just trying that out. But Morah is teacher.
Right. So what is this land of Moriah, and what are we actually referring to here? This is where the temple will be. In fact, it is.
That's what they worship.
Yeah.
Both sides. Actually.
Yeah, Mount Moriah is Zion. It is Jerusalem, what would become Jerusalem. In fact,
Well, that's why I'm seeing both of those.
yeah, yes, that's, you know what's interesting is that have you heard of this place called Shalem before? Yes, remember Melchizedek in Genesis previously was the king of Shalem. And now what did he say this it is he used this word Adonai Yirah. Yirah Shalem. What does that sound like? That's where Jerusalem comes from. In the mountain of God it shall be seen. So it's a combination of Yirah and Shalem. So it's Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, if you want to speak it that way. So yeah, this is what we're talking about is the Temple Mount, if you want to look at it that way. You remember how did they remember when they got possession of the Temple Mount? You know. Who got that? Yes, David purchased it from Ornan, the Jebusite. And he offered up that offering when the angel of Adonai was coming through the camp and slaughtering people because David decided he wanted to number God's sheep. It was not a good idea. So I just wanted to, make you aware that all of this is happening on the Temple Mount where the temple would eventually be built. The tradition says that it was on the rock of this threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite, which is, you might suppose, is that giant rock that is under the dome of the rock on the Temple Mount now. That is traditionally the site where this whole thing went down. It's also, I'm not going to say that that's where Yeshua was crucified on that rock. That would be a little awkward. They didn't crucify people in the temple complex. Nearby, though, in Mount Moriah, if you want to say in a general sense, yes. So Abraham, and then we want to make sure to keep those in our minds regarding Abraham and Isaac and the Son of God, Yeshua, being sacrificed in this same place. Tracy?
So Moriah also means seen of Yah, or Yah will see,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what is said later, is that when Isaac asks where the burnt offering is, Abraham says, my son, God will see the land for himself for a burnt offering.
Right.
And then again in verse 14, and Abraham called the place that Yahovah will see, so that it said until this day, in the mount of Yahovah it will be seen.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
About the location
Mm-hmm.
that I've noticed in the last couple of months, various archaeologists and rabbis love arguing about it.
Oh, you bet.
It's like, oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm.
We'll find out soon enough, right?
Yeah, and frankly, I'm not thoroughly convinced that the temple is where they said it was anyway. I think that might have been Fort Antonia. That's just my supposition from looking at some of that archaeological stuff. I think, Keith, you and I have talked about that, and you shared some information with me about the location of where the temple was that is not traditionally where they think it was. Yeah, I'm a little curious about that. I don't know. But if that's true, and if indeed some of us understand the prophecies in a certain way, then the Jewish brothers and sisters will not really need to get control of the Temple Mount to build an altar and a temple. So you never know. So certainly curious. Now, another thing that would just like we saw, Ishmael thrown under a bush as a baby, we also have a lot of in our minds the picture of a young boy being slaughtered on an altar by Isaac or by Abraham. So how old is Isaac when this issue takes place here? Very much an adult. Yeah, my understanding from the sources and from some traditional sources say anywhere between 27 and 37 years old. This is not a kid being sacrificed by his father. Yes, sir.
Wouldn't it be interesting if he would be the same age as Yeshua?
Yeah.
Very close.
Yeah.
I mean, between 27 and 37 is right in the ballpark. Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me a bit. Absolutely. Absolutely. So just a couple of setting the stage kind of things. Now, I want to ask you this. If you go on and do a Google search of the sacrifice of Isaac, well, you're going to come up with some interesting stuff, I can tell you. there's all kinds of the godless people of the world will say, there you go, there's human sacrifice, God ordering Abraham to kill his son. What kind of God is this? What is this? Why did he do this? This doesn't make any sense. Yeah, they'll just have a field day with this passage out there. But I want to bring to your attention, what did God actually tell him to do?
First of all, it was a test.
Yes, it was a test. It was definitely a test, but I think you want to pay close attention here. If you look at the Hebrew, when God actually commanded him, he said in verse 2, take your son now, your only son, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as an ascending offering. Now, look at the Hebrew of what that actually says in the Hebrew, and you'll be kind of interested to see this. Because I think that the Hebrew gives us an idea. And have we run into Abraham having difficulty with receiving a set of instructions and interpreting it the only way that he can figure out how to interpret it? We just talked about this a couple of weeks ago. Do you remember what it was? Circumcision. Yes, because we looked in the Hebrew and it said, you shall cut away the what? The blockage. It did not say anything about a foreskin. It didn't say anything about a physical body part. But Abraham had to interpret that somehow, and he did. And we saw this comparison about the blockage of seed, and we noticed that it was talking about trees being uncircumcised and different stuff like this. And so we kind of had, what we have is God proposing a challenge to Abraham and saying, I want you to remove the blockage. You must remove the blockage between yourselves and all of your descendants in order to be in covenant with me. Now, Abraham is trying to interpret that as best he can. And I think that he did a fine job, but that is what he had to do, was try to figure out, what does this mean? It's a deep spiritual thing. And we talked about that for a couple of weeks, if I remember correctly. But Abraham interpreted it as a physical thing. Not saying he didn't understand what it was, but he thought, I need to do something physical with this. And why wouldn't he? That is the human condition, is to take spiritual things and try to interpret them as best we can. Now, when the father says to him, your son whom you love, take him to the land of Moriah and offer him there, this is olah, offer him there as an offering. You shall into the land of Moriah and offer him to go, and Allah, to go up. Basically, if you wanted to translate this literally, it might say, go to the land of Moriah and make your son go up.
Which makes me think of Messiah being lifted up.
Does, doesn't it? So now, what is Abraham going to interpret that as? He's like, well, how do I make my son go up? That's a spiritual thing. It's a challenging command that he is going to interpret in a physical way. And he's going to think, how can I make things go up?
Maybe they have a hard time with these letters since it's so close to
That's an interesting insight, Mike, is frankly it is actually similar to the word orlah, which is that blockage, which was the part of about the circumcision. It's a very similar term. But I think that my interpretation of this is that God did not literally intend for Abraham to kill the child. He meant for him to offer him up. And this is directly related to that blood covenant, that covenant of blood that he made with Abraham. Because remember, we talked about the blood covenant in Semitic cultures and how there was the exchange of a son. He's saying, I want you to give me your son. And we're going to see so many similarities between these things in Yeshua and I mean, it's obvious. I mean, it's smacking us in the face. But the depth of it is pretty astonishing. But you want to look at this, basically God saying, I want you to make your son go up to me. And he's like, I don't exactly know how to do that, but I have an idea. The only way that my son can come to you is if he dies. smoke, going up in smoke. Now,
Well, he tells him to offer him on the mountain too, so, how else could he interpret,
yeah, it's a questionable thing.
And then when God responds in it, on verse 12, he
Mhm.
says, for now I know that thou fearest God, seeing that thou hast not withheld thy son. He didn't say you did it wrong, you really didn't even need to go that far.
Because you obeyed my voice.
He said you obeyed.
Yeah.
You were willing to obey even in giving your son to me, your only son.
Sure.
So
So am I saying that God did not intend for him to do that? I'm saying the possibility exists that he. You don't have to agree.
No, I'm not saying that. I don't understand the reasoning of the wording that you're talking about of that olah, whatever that is.
Well, because that word does not mean strictly to offer a sacrifice. It just means go. I mean, you know that word is the root of aliyah. If you make aliyah, what are you doing? You're going up. That's all that word means, is go up. If you are in the synagogue and you're a guest or something, remember how they have a guest come up and, when Yeshua went to the synagogue, they called him forward and he read from the scroll. Today this has been fulfilled in your hearing. And when, Brother Paul went to visit some synagogues throughout the Roman Empire, they said, do you have a word to speak? Come up. That's called aliyah. Go up. So this is the root of that word, where he told Abraham, make your son go up. Now, yes, that word is often translated as an ascending offering. There's no question about that. But I am bringing into it a spiritual insight, hopefully, that is, I want you to offer your son to me because I'm going to offer my son to you. Okay, am I saying that he misinterpreted it and that God did not literally intend for him to kill his son? I would say the potential exists for there to be some confusion here, because frankly, what if God did it literally intend? Okay, he could have very clearly said, go to the mountain and slaughter your son, bind him, and he could have given him more explicit instructions to say, I want you to kill your son and burn him on an altar. He didn't say that. Okay, second of all, if God wanted him to actually slaughter his son and burn him on an altar, could he have done that, and would that be a problem for God? No, because he would have just brought him back from the dead. In fact, some rabbinic sources say that Isaac actually died of fright or something while he was there on the altar, and that God resurrected him on the spot, which I think is fascinating to begin with. Not that Abraham killed him, but that somehow he died.
And also that he was probably stronger than Abraham, and he could have said, forget it.
Absolutely.
I'm out of here,
That's another brilliant insight. Yeah. He did it willingly. He could have fought that old man off. I mean, how old is Abraham? He's 150 years old.
That's always fascinated me. Why he even let his dad do that?
Sure.
His father do that.
Maybe they both knew that actually wasn't going to end the soul.
Sure.
The only one that didn't have enough faith was Sarah.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Angela, I apologize. Go ahead.
I think that whole thing, even though, however Abraham interpreted whatever, what it demonstrated was Abraham was willing to.
Yeah.
You might say, well, God would have known whether Abraham was what, but Abraham didn't know.
That's the
Now,
key
he
point.
didn't know, and Isaac didn't know.
Right.
But because that occurred, now everyone knows that Abraham was willing to do that.
Yes. I think that's the key point there. Yes.
Doing something that would be this, how did you do that?
Yeah. Yeah, I can't imagine. Jason?
To speak to that point, Isaac submitted to his father, kind of like Jesus submitted to his father and allowed himself to be sacrificed. And
Yeah.
James and I had talked about the sacrificing of Isaac at some point in time, and he pointed out that when God says that which you think in your heart, you've sinned. If you've done it in your heart, you've sinned. So in that case, Abraham was willing to follow through with the sacrifice. So in his heart, or in his mind, he sacrificed Isaac. He had already done it because he thought about it. So at that point in time, he made the sacrifice. He made the offering.
Yeah.
And
You have to walk it out and then.
stopped him before it was
Right.
actually taking place physically, but it actually happened
Sure.
in the spiritual realm.
His intent was there.
And the physical oftentimes reflects understanding of the spiritual, so it's a foreshadowing of the spiritual.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100%. Was there another hand raised? Tracy?
I was just going to say, whether or not you think he was crucified on a stake or a cross or whatever, I think it's interesting that it's split wood, so there's divided wood and it's laid upon Isaac's
Yep.
feet specifically,
Yep.
carrying this wood up the mountain
Mm-hmm.
to be sacrificed upon.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And that was one of my notes coming up here, but we can deal with that now. You know, we have briefly talked about the comparison and contrast between Isaac and Yeshua. We mentioned in a couple of, like a week ago, we noticed some similarities, like the son of a promise, miraculous birth, you know, if you remember those notes. But now it starts to build even further that Mount Moriah is the same place that Yeshua would be offered up as Yitzhak was. Isaac carried the wood on his back for a sacrifice, and Yeshua carried the wood on his back. A substitutionary sacrifice was here demonstrated. Abraham received his son back. Paul actually uses that same language. He received him back as though dead, almost like a resurrection, which would be just like Yeshua. And it says on the third day, Abraham lifted his eyes when he arrived to the place. I think that's kind of curious. This third day imagery is kind of interesting. Angela?
Tracy keeps bringing up the thing about the wood and the thing about the scene on the mountain.
Well, then make her stop. Sorry. I'm just...
She keeps opening the door for the other thing. And I don't know if you want to do that tonight or keep waiting.
Are you jumping the gun? Okay, fine. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, no, we're going to deal with that this evening. Give me just a moment and we're absolutely going to cover that. But I want to cover one thing first. There's a couple of firsts here. You know how we love firsts, right? This is the first time in this passage that the word testing or trying is occurring in the Hebrew text, which is absolutely fascinating. That in verse 1 it says that that you've tested him, and it's the Hebrew word nasa. Okay, does that sound anything like something else to you? It's basically the exact same word written the exact same way, but you just change a vowel pointing and you have a different word. It's one of the Torah portions. Naso. You know what naso is? It's to lift up. Okay, so check this out. The Hebrew word here is nasa, which is to tempt or to try or to prove, but it is also the same root as naso, which is to lift up. This definitely signifies to me that God will definitely test or prove us, like you're proving a metal or you're a picture appealed to me in my mind of I'm going to build a wooden bridge or a rope bridge across a chasm. I'm going to test that bridge before I send my family across it or even walk across it myself. I might tie a rope onto myself as I'm testing my little bridge here. Things need to be tested. Why does your faith need to be tested? Yeah, to see if you're worthy of what is a good question.
Serving and loving God.
To stand before him.
Stand before him. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think it helps to see what's inside us.
Yeah. Was this a test? Oh, sorry, Gracie?
Well, David wrote, try me, test me, and see if there is any wicked way.
Right.
Lead me.
Right, absolutely.
Because God sees our heart. We don't really.
Right. No, we don't.
He does.
You're absolutely right. I mean, to me, this really demonstrates, what does God want from you? What is he going to demand of you? Obedience? In what ways? In every way. Full obedience.
First thing you have to believe.
You do. Absolutely you do.
That's what he wants first.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can't do anything. That's why it says Abraham believed God and it was counted to him as righteousness. But then you'll notice that right after this we get to the life of Yitzhak and he says, because your father Abraham obeyed me, This is why this is why the promises will be fulfilled. This is a key. It was, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's a good insight.
Also, too, I wanted to point out that
Yeah.
fear of God is associated with obedience to God.
Right.
So you cannot say you fear God if you do not obey Him. Like
Right.
what He says here in verse 12.
Mhm.
For now I know that you are a fearer of God,
Mhm.
and you have not withheld your Son from me,
Yeah.
because you obeyed my voice.
Yeah, again, yeah, absolutely. The fear of God being linked to that is so powerful. And I think that the lesson for us here really is that, what will God demand from you? Everything. It's really a misnomer and a dangerous one when you have a lot of people perhaps teaching, and they have over the generations, that, you can come to Jesus and come to God and have a life of ease. Have any of you experienced that? Your life has been easy? I don't mean it that way. I'm saying, I don't know many people who have deliberately and with their whole heart sought to follow God and had an easy life.
What value is it if it's easy?
This is a good point. This is the whole point, frankly.
Give your children everything, what will they expect?
Everything. For nothing.
The thing is about abiding in Him and walking in His will is even when you go through these trials, He makes your path straight.
Yes.
It is not as hard as it could have been.
Yes. That, I think, is the key point, is that we all know that life is challenging. It really is. It's not a cakewalk. It's not a piece of cake. But you know what? If you are doing it without God, it can be downright distressing, and it can bring you to your knees, and you can resort to drugs and alcohol and all kinds of addictions, suicide, whatever it is that's going to try to get you through that. But I think that we need to remember that, yes, the Torah and observing the Torah, what do we do that for? Because we love our Father, we want to do His will, but it explicitly tells us in Deuteronomy, at the end portions of Deuteronomy, that we obey these commandments and you'll be blessed. You will be blessed. There's no question about it. These are a tremendously powerful blessing. Does it mean it is a life of ease? No, it does not. And what does God demand of us? Everything. If you have something in your life that you're clinging to, relying upon, or perhaps has even elevated itself to the level of an idol, He will take it from you. If it is good for you, He will give it back to you. Just like Isaac was given back. If it is not good for you and it is damaging, He'll take it away from you because it is poisonous to you. And
we're assayers in precious metals.
yes.
So you know that refiner's fire.
That's right. That's right. Let us not build with wood, hay, and stubble.
Well, what I'm thinking is God has, at least in my life, different intensities of tests.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
Gold smelts at 1900 degrees, and platinum at 1800 degrees, and copper a little less.
Lead even less.
Yeah, and so, I've experienced a variety of different metals at temperatures.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's a great insight. We do need to be tested and tried, and Paul talks about that a lot too. So that's a really great insight. And I want to just briefly take you to something really interesting where here in verse 13 that he says, hey, stop what you're doing. Don't lay your hand on the child. And then he lifted his eyes and he looked and he saw a ram behind him, a ram caught in a bush by its horns. We know that this ram is a picture of what? It's definitely a picture of the Messiah, Yeshua. And if you look at the Hebrew in this sentence, some of the key words in the Hebrew, and you look at just alternate meanings, because we know that Hebrew words have many different meanings. And in fact, what's so curious and mysterious and powerful about the Hebrew language is that you can plug in these Hebrew word meanings, even if it seems completely opposite, and it still works. In a spiritual sense, it just still works. So Angela is going to briefly walk us through.
Wait, John, First you're gonna.
Oh yeah, I wanted to introduce you to this, and I think that this is what Yeshua was talking about when he was in. It's likely to me, if you look at the Gospel of John in chapter 8, and I'll read it for you. It's near the end of chapter 8. It says this. In verse 56. It says, "Your father Abraham was glad that he should see my day, and he saw it and did rejoice." Now we might ask ourselves, when they did ask, you are not even 50 years old and you have seen Abraham? We know, of course, what Abraham said, right? He said, "I am telling you the truth. Before Abraham came to be, I am." And of course they picked up stones to stone him because they knew what he was saying. And so, when did Abraham see his day? I think it's right here in verse 13. And it's because of a slightly different rendering of this Hebrew into just one of the alternate meanings of the Hebrew word. And you'll see what it actually says. Take a look at this.
The last 4 words there, I think it's the last 4 words of verse 12, are behind, caught in a thicket by its horn. Okay, behold a ram behind him, caught in a thicket by its horn. Okay, those 4 words there, the last 4 words of that verse are haGar, a cause, it has a noon at the front, so it'd be nakaz, and then basabak, because it has a bait, and Karen, and then it has on the end, but I'm not quite sure of. But if you take that first word, it can mean behind. Like behind Abraham, there was a ram caught in a thicket. But it also means after or another. So let's go with this for a second. Okay, this next word, a cause, it can mean caught, but fastened. If you look in Strong's, you'll find this. I double checked it just to make sure I didn't want to take anyone's word for it. Okay, so we got fastened. The next word is, remember the bait at the beginning of a word means in with or on? Okay, the rest of this word, sabak, means thicket. Now, thicket could be a bush, I suppose. It's some kind of wooden thing. Sometimes in Isaiah and Psalms, he'll talk about thicket of the forest or thicket of trees. So some kind of tree-like structure. Okay. Maybe it's not a tree, tall tree with leaves. Maybe it's some kind of stunted tree. Okay. And then Karen means horn. It has a bit at the beginning because, again, in, with, or on. Horn. Figuratively, we know horn means power, right?
You can see that in the book of Daniel, talking about the different horns.
Revelation. Okay. So let's go with on and with as our bet meanings here. So behold, he sees a ram. He sees another fastened on a tree with power.
Nice. Oh, I have to
That's really cool, man.
So maybe Abraham did see his day.
Yeah.
He lifted his eyes and saw. If you just translate the Hebrew words with just slight variations, this is what you get.
And he was glad.
What?
And he was glad. You know why? Because if anyone gets redemption and grace, it's Abraham.
Yeah.
You know, we think these Old Testament people, they are all under the law, they don't get grace. Abraham got grace at a level we probably never will because of that event.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to mention that about the ram being caught in his thicket as like the crown of thorns being around the Messiah's head because he's
Just in case you missed it.
Replacement offering.
Yes.
See, I see it as Isaac representing us, that we were put up on this altar, and he says, no, not them, him. Take my son instead. And so he replaced that offering for us.
Yeah. This is such an incredibly powerful section of Scripture. Did you say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's kind of foreshadowed in the way that it's written in verse 18. Because in English, it's kind of a little backwards, but it says, God will provide for himself a lamb offering my son.
And the next verse says, Abraham says, this mountain I will call Adonai Yireh, because God
Well,
he'll see
it
to
says-
it, and he will be seen.
Do you notice in verse 8 that Mike was just talking about, it says, my son, Elohim does provide. Do you know that that word provide is the same word for seen, yireh? It's the same word. I don't know why they translated it provide in this place. It can be, that is one of the options to interpret it as provide, but why this word yirah appears like 5 times in this section. And every time they translate it as see, except for that one. They translate it as provide. It is a legitimate translation, but because it just seems a little weird, my son, God does see for himself the lamb for an ascending offering. I mean, that works for me. Does that work for you, Carla? It seems to work better for me, yeah. It is consistent. Carla?
I've heard that in Hebrew thought, when the word behind is used, it's something you can't see because it is behind you, so it always indicates the future. And when you look at a message from the future, it is indicating the world to come. So it points to the resurrection.
Interesting. That's fascinating. Good insight. Yes, John?
You mentioned earlier from when you read from John to I am. Do you think it's a coincidence also that it is 2 times when it says here I am? One time, he both says that here I am.
Well, yeah. Oh, you're talking about Abraham saying, here I am? Well, yeah, I think it's curious. But, it's kind of weird. In the Hebrew, that word is hineni, which made, behold, me. It's, here I am is where you translate it into English. And it makes me always think of that Leonard Cohen song. It's fascinating. It's like hineni, hineni. It's a great tune, by the way. But I think that there could be something potentially there. I think that's probably time for us to wrap up. But I want to bring to your attention one thing, and then we're going to quit. But I want you to keep this in mind and look at it this week if you get an opportunity. That here, I went back too far to Genesis 21. Sorry about that. Take your son now, your only son whom you love. Did you know that this word love right here, that's the first time that the Hebrew word love is used in the Torah is right there. Now we know about the rule of first mention right here in verse 2, where it says, take your son now, the one that you love, and go to the land of Moriah. That word, that is the first time ahav is used in the Torah, and we know that the rule of first mention will really inform us about what a Hebrew word means. And look at the context in which the first time the word love is used, and check that out. It's a really powerful thing, and we'll talk about that next week. Any other comments, questions, or concerns, Tracy?
That the word love is at ahav,
Uh-huh.
and that's the first mention? Okay, so that's cool because Av is father, and that's the first and the last letter.
Yeah.
The K is in the middle, that means revealed. So love is the father revealed.
Absolutely. Powerful, powerful stuff right here. This section, you guys, just as an FYI, I am so inadequate to talk about this. Do you realize, of course, that everything in the Bible so far has been leading up to this moment? This is the pinnacle, basically, of the, if you want to look at it, this is the pinnacle. We started off, it sounds like we started off with the God creating the heavens and the earth, but that was all just setting the stage for this. This is so, so powerful. There's so many depths and layers to this that we're just scratching the surface. The first time that the word testing is put into use, the first time the word love is used, sacrificial substitutions. There's so many powerful metaphors and mysterious things in the language. It's overwhelming, and I feel so terribly inadequate to even scratch the surface of this thing. We're definitely going to be talking about it next week, and I encourage you to do some research on it. Read it over and over and over in different translations. Read it in your interlinear. There's so many wonderful spiritual nuggets to be mined in this section. Read the Akedah prayers if you have a Hebrew Siddur. Look at it online. there's a whole series of prayers that are fashioned by the rabbis around this section. It's just amazing stuff. But thank you so much for the excellent conversation this evening and your good insights. Let's pray and we'll fellowship and have some fun.